Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 335. How honest should we be in job interviews? Srikanth Bollavaram, our guest this week, would say we should be honest about what we do and don't know, but find a way to share with the interviewer what you have the potential to do. Today, Srikanth leads a product development organization for a consumer packaged goods company, and you'll hear part one of his story this week. We'll talk about his background in mechanical engineering and computer science and his desire to continue learning. You'll hear about Srikanth's experience as a consultant, and we'll talk about how he wanted to build things while focusing on the practical application. This translated really well into building systems for the railroad industry. Oh yeah, in addition to job changes, you'll also hear about how relocation was a factor throughout Srikanth's career story. Let's get you to part one of our discussion with Srikanth Bollavaram.
Srikanth Bollavaram, welcome to the Nerd Journey.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about what it is that you do on a day-to-day basis?
My name is Srikanth Bollavaram. I am currently working for a global CPG company, leading a product development organization, and we're currently focused on building a product for a major business transformation called integrated business planning. I am originally from India, but I had the opportunity to move out of the country early in my career with a brief stint in Switzerland in a financial industry and then to the US. Right now, I live in Dallas, Texas with my family.
That's quite the movement across the world. Well, let's start in the early days, Srikanth. I think if I recall, you studied mechanical engineering and computer science. How did that come about and what made you interested in those topics?
Growing up in India, I always wanted to be an engineer. My curiosity to build things, how things work, that is one aspect of it. But in India, the social trend or the expectation back then is either you become a doctor or an engineer. That's an expectation. And then when I was in middle school, I believe we had to dissect a frog. I just couldn't do it. Maybe I would have passed out if I did. Then it became very clear that engineering is my path. Just to give a background, how the things work in India is when you want to go to engineering, you have to clear a test, something like SAT here, right? But the way it works is you have to be in top 1% if you're competing in an open category. Then you get into a good government school or you have to go to a private college. So the goal was to get into the top 1%, and based on your rank, you get to choose your major. I was in top 1%, but when I went to the counseling, you have like 2 minutes to decide either a mechanical engineering in a number one college in the state or go to a private college in computer science. I always had a dream of going to that university where I studied, so I just chose the mechanical engineering. But I always wanted to be a computer science engineer as well. Although I was a mechanical engineer, I was taking a lot of classes and computer courses and trying to kind of do the practical ways I can implement or do things, the mechanical engineering stuff in computer science. It all worked out very well.
I think for a lot of US-based people, there's a lack of understanding how that ranking system works in India, where it's basically a nationwide test, right? So you essentially have a national ranking in that specific area, just maybe even overall on the test, right? So some universities will take top 1%, some will take top 5%, something like that.
Yes, and we have got a national level test, but we also have a state level test. And you get to the percentage wise, but you literally get ranked like 1 to 1,000 and 10,000, and based on that, you get a choice of the major. You just get called, and the majors get chosen in the ranking in the order the candidates were called. So you don't know which major you would get into until you go to the counseling. I mean, at that time when I was graduating, very few engineering colleges, both nationally and statewide. But I believe now there is quite a bit of choice, getting more towards how the U.S. education is now.
As it brings in more revenue, then there's a lot more incentive to invest in that kind of institution or that major at a different institution, right? So yeah, that makes absolute sense. Almost it would make sense to have a national policy around that. We don't here in the US, but it would make sense.
Definitely. And I think India, the country where it was, and the need for the engineers or the talent required both on the service but also domestically, I think that required expansion of both in colleges, both government wise, also private. I think that expanded quite a bit from when I studied versus now, for sure. Yeah.
Well, there's this idea of, I think I know what I would be interested in studying. And then I actually get there and begin to study it. So what I want to know is, was the subject matter as interesting as you thought it would be when you got into it? And how did you go from there?
It's a great question. Till engineering, the education was more of a theory based, at least till high school and all that back in India. And I was expecting that to change in engineering. It did change, but not to the level I wanted it. So, for example, if you want to do a engineering design, you were still doing on a paper, which is basically a 2D model, right?
Okay.
You can see how it really works. So I was like, I needed to do something which I actually want to visualize. And that's where I was doing the computer languages. And I tried, hey, can I actually draw this on a computer and try to do in a real time? Right. And that gave me like more of an opportunity to experiment with things, see what happens. So I was naturally more comfortable on hands-on versus a theoretical aspect of things. There were still labs and all that, but they were not still real worlds. So that's one example. Another example is I was studying thermodynamics. There were a lot of labs, but I actually wanted to see, if you really want to see a thermodynamics, how the energy transition happens, you go to a power plant and see the whole thing, how it works, how you generate the heat energy and how it converts to, electrical energy. And that to me was more interesting. So in engineering, what I try to do is focus on less on academics, but more on the practical applications of those academics. And that turned out actually really good in my favor, because when I was graduating, all the consulting companies were coming and interviewing, and they were more looking for that broader application or a mindset. It was easier for me to get selected, even though my academics were not the top in the class, but I had a broad variety of experience both in computers and engineering, and I could explain things in an easy way.
So there was a partnership between the school you attended and all these consulting firms, such that the consulting firms would come in and interview students who were getting close to graduating. Is that how it worked?
Yes. And especially for the good universities, although, and in this case, more of a computer-based consultancy, but since it was a reputed college or university, actually, they were open to take candidates from other majors such as mechanical engineering and others, because they knew that if you had got into this college, means you had either, you were a bright students, one, and the second were, they used to do like more of a test, like which are based on something like SAT, or determine more of your competitive ability and all that, and then ask general questions about how you solve problems or what you have done in the past, etc. So there was a partnership with the major universities, but also they were open to recruiting candidates from various majors.
I actually think that the desire to understand how things work and the practical application of that sets you up quite nicely to be able to communicate how things work in a simpler way. I'm not confident that everyone could translate it super well, but if you know it well, that's the first step in being able to communicate it back and tell someone.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And, just to give an example, in my interview, there was a specific question asked on internal combustion engine, just as I don't know how that came up, but, in India, they were designed as based on the Western designs, but it really didn't work on certain vehicles, especially on the military side, because they had to go into a rough terrain and, the fuel injection doesn't appropriately come into when you're going through all the potholes and or the terrain which is not it suited for. And I read somewhere, and I actually did some research on how the engineers in India changed that. They built a stabilizer so that it still be fuel efficient. So I kind of explained that example more than the concept. It so happened that the interview person was an ex-military, and he appreciated it so much that you could actually go and look at things in a way which are practical for the country or the situation you are in versus just theoretical aspect of it.
That's a powerful skill now that I think about it. And it's a generalizable one, right? The ability to maybe explain something that's potentially extremely technical in a way that grounds it in reality, but in a way that other people can understand it. I think it's one of the core skills for us in solution engineering, to explain our products and how they work. And it just strikes me, of course, that's got to be useful everywhere.
It is. And if you can understand the problem very well and explain it very well, you probably would have solved like 80-90% of it. That's the key, how much time you're spending to understand the problem and the practical applications of it, before you draw down to a solution.
This feels like it falls into a pattern that we've seen before, which is if you think that you understand a concept, can you write it down, write down an explanation in your own words? Because
yes,
one of the people that you're going to be explaining this to is potentially yourself in 30 days when you've forgotten the process of learning this, right? So if you can explain it to yourself, then that's good. If you fail at explaining it to yourself, then that is probably a sign that you don't have quite the understanding that you think that you have.
I was fortunate to have a leader who told exactly what you just said, is that this was in terms of design, but he said, just put it on a paper and explain it to yourself. And if you can explain and not have any questions while you're explaining, or you got through all the questions while you're building that, then you thought through all the implications of it, right? And that will get to you a more better solution or a design in this case. And that was always you put it on a paper, go through it. I think that definitely helps. And even to your point, you would remember more after even a couple of days or a month after.
Is that something that you found yourself doing when you made the move into that consulting role after school? Or was it later on in your career?
I would say later in my career. Early in my career, I was a programmer. I was more curious and trying to discover things more, which were not told to me, going areas. If I was given one sort of a program, I used to go and test an impact of that in other areas and try to ask more questions. But definitely later in my career, when I went from more of a program leader and did that conversion into tech leader and architect, I picked up that skill based on, to your point, some of coaching and things gotten from thankfully to the leaders when I had that time.
Tell us a little bit about that relocation. It's one thing to go out into the workforce, but it's another to do that and relocate and be in a new environment and a new job.
This was unexpected for me, going to Switzerland. I think you're referring to that relocation, my first relocation. So at that time, I was more of a programmer, but was doing quite a few things in my team. I actually wanted to go to US, but since the project is Switzerland, they would keep on asking me, hey, can you go here for a few months? And I'm like, okay, I always can go to US, so I'll make that trip. But, I kind of not shown interest initially, but then one day they said, hey, you have to go for this assignment. And I literally didn't know what the assignment was, but I was chosen to do that assignment. And I'm like, okay, what is there to lose? If not anything, I'll just go to Switzerland and spend few months and come back. So I got on a flight, went there, and when I went there, what I learned was I was supposed to be act as a liaison between the customer who is giving us a project and to the IT team. And I think this is a very important thing I want to point out. A lot of times people are observing you, what you do, and a lot of your skill set or what you are is determined by what people are observing. And they somehow thought that I was a better fit for this. I didn't even know what the job was. And when I went there, I remember my boss on the customer side asking me a lot of business questions. I had no idea. So I told him, hey, I don't know what they told you, but this is what I know. This is what I don't know. And again, I think this is again talking about relocation, right? It's all about context, your experience, and that a lot of it is built on how you take it. I could have sent back on the next flight because I was not fit for a job. So, but I talked to him and explained what I know and what I could do potentially based on if somebody could give a training. So they sent me back on a business side training for like 3 days to get up to speed quickly. Initially, I was supposed to be there 4 months, but they liked my work, so they extended me for like 2 years. I actually had to spend more time than I would have liked. But the bottom line is, I think I was a consultant. You just have to go and look at the job, what you have been assigned for, not necessarily, just this is what I'm going to do. What is the problem at the hand and do it well. And if you don't know, build that trust that you don't know, but you will learn and still do it. It was a great experience from that regard. It could have ended up otherwise, but it's what opportunities come to you and then how do you take it and run with it is all makes the difference.
There's definitely a lesson there, right? Being honest about what your capabilities are and aren't. Not just saying, hey, that isn't something that I feel like I'm qualified to do, but is like, here's what I can do, and here's how I'd get up to speed in order to do what it is that you'd need me to do. It's not just, oops, sorry, but it's, hey, one of the reasons they sent me here was I'm one of the people who can get up to speed very, very quickly and articulate problems.
Definitely, yeah. And I think bottom line is building that trust and then following it through. Not just saying, but really follow it through, even though it requires some extra additional effort in the beginning. Follow it through to make sure you do serve the needs of the problem at hand, not something what you want to do. I actually had no idea what the job was, but still, I was curious enough to learn and go through it and finally solve the problem at hand.
I have to think that the manager in question really had two choices when you shared what you knew with them. You could have said, okay, I can't believe I hired this company to do this thing because they didn't send someone who was quite qualified the way I needed them to be. I think it's an important lesson, not only for us when we're interviewing with someone to share and be honest about what we can do and how we would get up to speed, as John said, but it's also a lesson from the manager's seat. I see this person has potential. I'm going to give them the chance to learn this.
Yes.
And let's see what happens. Maybe it'll turn out great. Maybe it won't, but I'm at least not closed-minded, based on this person not fitting exactly what I wanted right this second. How can we close the gap?
Leaders I had in the past definitely given me those chances, where sometimes whether even you're competent enough, still, struggle or not do initially, gave that a runway for you to adjust and still be able to execute. Currently, as a leadership position, that's what, I keep that in mind. Of course, you do need to look at the overall candidate competency and the ability to adjust and learn and, put in that efforts to execute. But that's something, I learned as well, given the opportunities, what I got and how people treated me in those situations.
What kind of pressure did you feel, if any, just based on the fact that you knew what this person expected and you knew you weren't there yet? You said you took the training, but how did you also at the same time overcome this maybe imposter syndrome or just, I don't know if I'm qualified enough yet?
The first couple of days training did help me to understand at least how the business runs and, what I am asked to do there. So that gave me some comfort is that, I can do this. before I didn't know anything. So after a week, I did know. And then while I was getting through the training, I did build some relationships with the people. So I also knew if I had an issue, I could always call these people and find out if there is a help needed. Within a week, I got pretty confident. And second, I made a mind shift. I knew the programming, I knew all this, but this is something I cannot learn anywhere. Like this is about the project we were doing is a Swiss stock exchange clearing and settlement, and also the not only domestic but international. And it's a rewrite of that, but also the messaging integration with all the international. I'm like, this is like once in a lifetime opportunity. If I put enough efforts, I could learn quite a bit in this arena. So I got more energized by that. So to answer your question, there was some bit of a imposter syndrome, but I believe in early in your career, you're kind of ignorant to some extent. The ability, the excitement to learn and the opportunity, what you can do overshadowed me, at least initially. If I had that been in the latter in the career, maybe I would have thought more. But at that point, I know enough. I could reach out to the people if needed. But at the end, there is so much to learn. So let's go and learn and do it.
Is this maybe a little bit inherent in that consultant role? I think you mentioned that was the title, right? Or maybe it was just the functional title, right? You come as a consultant.
Yes.
And so presumably that means somebody from outside the organization or company who is supposed to go in with fresh eyes, maybe learn a little bit from bottom up, but also bring in a separate contextual understanding and compare and contrast and give some feedback there. Does that feel accurate?
Yes, but there was a problem to solve in the sense they had this company already building the solution for them. But what they thought is there was a bit of a gap in terms of what business wanted and what the solution was designing. And they needed somebody in the middle. At that time, we didn't have the product roles or, even to some extent, business analyst roles were a bit of an upcoming term at that point. So it's kind of a mix of both technical and business knowledge to make sure it's appropriate requirements, design, and solution being done for what is needed. It is true that they wanted somebody external, but they wanted somebody to be their voice to this external agency. But they didn't have enough technical skills, so they wanted somebody to provide that so they represent them versus the external. In a lot of ways, what you said is right, but not necessarily to assess and do things, but almost like be part of them and execute that project representing them.
Got it. Drive the project towards the solution as they felt that they were understanding it and maybe wasn't getting through to the other party. So very much today, what we might think of as like an external product manager, working with a contractor who's developing a product for you. But like you said, at a time when that hadn't been really codified yet as a role and title and with an understanding of it. It's so interesting.
Almost like a facilitator, right?
Except like holding people accountable.
Yes.
And having metrics around the business needs this, and we measure that by your ability to deliver this other thing. So if you're not driving towards that, then you're missing what the actual point of the contract is.
Yes, and that was the key. In a lot of ways, I was holding my own company people accountable to deliver that, sitting on the other side, which was a bit awkward at that point early in stage, but I think that was a very valuable experience because at the end, that drives trust and accountability in a ways that was not existing before.
I mean, one of the reasons why an organization would do that would be because they didn't want to ruin the relationship. So if you're holding another team accountable, then you can be looked at as the bad guy or, really held in a negative light. However, if that's not actually the company that's doing the hiring and it's the appearance is that it's just that person, then eventually that person can leave and the relationship between the two organizations hasn't been ruined.
That's true. When we talk about either consultancy or anywhere, it's building that trust, keeping your promises, executing and delivering it through. Regardless of which side you work on, I think will go a long way for sure.
There are elements of leadership sprinkled in here too. leadership of advocating for business, advocating for technical things, because you're in this really neat spot between the business and the extremely technical side. So in my mind, that gives you a very good optionality. You can choose to go, all right, I want to go more technical, or maybe I want to go more business or keep doing what I'm doing. But I want to know how that spot influenced your next move. Once the job in Switzerland came to an end, you were ready to do something else. How did you decide which direction to go based on that experience?
That did kind of teach me you just have to be multifaceted. You need to not only good at it vertically what you are, but also gain a well-rounded experience. Work on the business side, try to understand the business, do various roles. So what that prompted me is initially, at least in my career, take whatever the roles thrown at you. Don't ask, whether it is specifically this or that. Try multiple areas, right? And then you can choose which direction you want to. And that also enables you to be a well-rounded person, multifaceted, and you could be more well-rounded person. So the next opportunity to me more was I wanted to come to US. It was for a credit rating agency, and the challenge was completely different. But I don't think I really thought through what that was. I just, I was like, just take the roles as they come in. It did help me later in my career to be more intentional in going around, and I think we can talk about it. Every 2-3 years, I used to go from one area to other to get more that well-rounded experience. Yeah,
That's interesting because it's the collision of two ideas. One was almost this lesson that you had learned previously, which was it almost doesn't matter what my skills are. I maybe feel confident enough in myself to land, figure out what it is that they need, and then learn how to do that and still deliver at a high level. But then another lesson was, well, maybe that's not how I should approach my career. Maybe I should be a little bit more intentional about maximizing my chances for success or job satisfaction or career growth or other things. That's an interesting tension.
I actually, I forgot to mention, I also wanted to do my higher education. So I wanted to combine both. So I want to do my master's in the US. So I was like, okay, I'm going to take an engagement, but also enroll in master's and continue my education.
Did your master's end up being in something a little bit different than where you started?
Yeah, I did master's in MIS, more or less in a computer science area. So I did do that in the area I was working on. But then later, I did go through a lot of other programs. Once I finished the master's, I did go through more of, leadership courses, executive courses, or program management courses, etc. Those added, I think, another aspect of skill set which I needed at that point of career. Yeah.
So that degree course, Management Information Services, that's the only thing that I could really think of that would be a college degree course that would steer you towards what we today call information technology, and at the time was called MIS, right?
Correct.
And I think not that many undergraduate courses, had that title or had that coursework. It was all, computer science, which is programming, or business, which is general business, right? Which it could incorporate accounting, it could incorporate operations, any number of things.
Yeah, it's a combination of business, information technology, but also, to some extent economics, finance, etc. as well. And because I was, I believe, 5 years into my career at that point, and I knew the programming, I know how to build the systems. At that point, I felt that was more appropriate to not only build the systems, but also understand the other aspects to be more complete.
Yeah, because you mentioned you like to build things and you like to figure out how they work. And one of the best ways to figure out how something works is to build it.
Yes.
At least that's my take when it comes to technology.
Totally. And see, when I joined the railroad, one of the good things is there aren't many industry products out there for the railroad industry. What I discovered when I joined the railroad is most of the engineering or the technology was in-house built. And what that means is they had a very strong engineering presence, not only just on the software side, but also on the hardware, because you needed to build the software, but in a lot of cases, railroad, you also manage your communications, etc., to the field. So you had like hardware components, and also you had components on the locomotive and whatnot, which were very specific. So the building part of that, my desire was really, really completed in the railroad. And I was very surprised to see how technically advanced the railroad information technology or engineering teams were. And that's where I would say I cut my teeth, or what do you say, like, grow your engineering skills there very much. And the leaders there were just fantastic, even coaching and, growing us in the way that, we could solve those bigger problems. And if you think about it, the programs were really big too, and the impact of that were very big too. So it really did help expand our both engineering, but also the impact it is doing overall in terms of industry, but also to some extent to the economy of the US as well.
That is so fascinating, that the idea of joining an industry where maybe the term is specialized, but that doesn't even feel necessarily correct, but specialized enough that the commodity technology is not going to advance and save you.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the rest of the world isn't going to come and save you. We're here on our own, and we have to fix everything, have an end-to-end system where we own all the parts. And maybe some of the things can be commodity and off the shelf, but they maybe have to be tuned to our use case. So if we're buying off the shelf, it has to be off the shelf ruggedized or something, right? And when you're monitoring locomotives, this was, before Internet of Things.
Yes, yeah.
Just a whole lot of, like I said, owning things end to end. That is fascinating.
Owning things end to end, and since there was no market outside, and if you can make them solutions not only for but productize that, you could actually sell them outside. So not only just build the solution end to end, but how do we productize it? That's another area I got a good experience in terms of design. Not only just build these big solutions, but how do you productize for other railroads to use? I think what you said is right. Everything is an opportunity when there is not a solution. You build it, but you can also productize and market it. We talk about autonomous cars, planes, and whatnot. There was a mandate. It came more on the safety side to have an autonomous control of the trains, so that for the safety reasons, if you have an engineering capacitor or whatnot, you still should have the ability to stop the train. But what that means, once you have the control, you could do many things. So we were developing technologies which could adapt to that future technology, which is a current technology right now, which is there on the trains. But it was very fascinating in terms of control systems, how you build those, which are real time. You take an action and it actually gets implemented on the field, right? We were fortunate to get to that experience well before that was a term like, outside. Now we talk about autonomous cars or other areas. So the control systems, which are extreme, I would say you need extreme talent in the software or, hardware and whole engineering, end to end from that perspective also. You also have to think safety critical as well, right? You need to make sure it not only performs the function what you asked to do, but in all cases, it's the safety of the system is not compromised. So you have to think all those boundary conditions as well.
This is like the perfect marrying of your computer science and the engineering background that you studied with your MIS degree. But what I didn't hear you say, Srikanth, was whether you actually sought out the railroad industry specifically, or this kind of fell in your lap. I'm really curious about that part.
Well, no, I did not sort out. It was actually illogical decision if you really think. I moved from Switzerland to California. I was working there, and then I moved to Midwest, middle of nowhere for this job, and it was mainly for family reasons. My wife, she was studying in the university in Nebraska, so I had to move. So the only reason I moved there was for family reasons, but it happened to be the best decision, in terms of, to your point, combining all those experience and really growing myself it was a very good environment to nurture the talent, experiment, do things, even sometimes fail, but still recover and really enjoy the engineering work. So it turned out to be a good one.
I really enjoyed hearing Srikanth say that he understood the technology, he knew the programming, but he spotted this major opportunity to learn of a specific industry and how the technology impacted it, whether it be the financial industry or the railroad industry in his case. He saw value in using that technology inside a specific industry. And this took his knowledge a step beyond just building the systems, but really understanding their impact on the business as a whole and its customers. So this is really a great exercise in truly understanding the requirements that a system needs to meet because you understand the business and the way it operates, and understanding all the design implications and other architectural considerations that need to go into this. For example, if something affects safety, like Srikanth mentioned in the railroad industry. If you're looking for more stories of guests embracing industry expertise, check out our discussions with Amy Arnold in episode 281 and 282. She spoke to gaining some experience with technology in the public sector, and that propelled her to new, interesting future opportunities as well. Srikanth also spoke to us about building end-to-end solutions. So after gathering and understanding the requirements because he understood the business operations, everything had to be supported end-to-end, hardware and software. It was truly product management outside of a technology vendor because they were thinking about how can they turn what they built into a product that railroad company could potentially sell to other railroad companies. So if you're looking to progress into the role of product manager, keep in mind that's not just something that exists at a technology vendor or a technology company. It can exist in many other industries when they're thinking about building things like products. And maybe the company in question is not productizing something to sell outside the company. Maybe they've productized it because internally it needs to be used and or modified for many different business units or business groups with slightly different use cases. But that product management mindset can still serve that need that a business has, even if it's not a technology company or a company that sells technology things. There was definitely a theme of being open and gaining expertise through new opportunities in different areas to make you more of a well-rounded individual. And I really liked that lesson that Srikanth shared, and it's something that he's modeled throughout his career. I would add to this, just watch out for taking new opportunities that might involve more change than you can handle. Your homework before we release part 2 of Srikanth's story is to go back and listen to an episode with Daniel Amir, episode 325, and it's titled Overwhelmed by Ambiguity. It's a story of a previous guest who stepped into too much change in his career at one time. I think that's a great one to listen back to and prepare for the next installment of Srikanth's story.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at BJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.